If you help me, they will come for you. Oh. She heard him say it. She understood every word, and she picked him up anyway. His blood soaked through her uniform in seconds, hot, dark, real, and the storm outside was so loud it swallowed the sound of her own heartbeat. He was twice her size. He didn't know her name 2 hours ago. Every voice in her head was screaming, "Drop him, run, save yourself." But Sarah Turner had spent her entire life choosing everyone else first. Tonight, that choice was going to cost her everything, or give her something she never saw coming. Subscribe right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's go. Don't open the doors for anyone tonight. Gerald had said it that morning, flat voice, no explanation, eyes that slid away from hers before she could ask a follow-up question. She'd stood there in the kitchen with her coffee mug halfway to her mouth and watched him hang up the phone, straighten his tie, and walk out the back door like he hadn't just said something that lodged itself in the base of her skull like a splinter. Anyone, he'd said, not strangers, not visitors, anyone. Sarah Turner had filed that word in the part of her brain she kept for things she didn't understand yet, but would probably need later. She'd gotten very good at that, the filing, the waiting, the watching. 6 months on this property had turned her into a different kind of woman than the one who'd driven up that gravel road with 2 duffel bags in a desperation she hadn't let herself name out loud. She was still the same woman who cleaned their floors and folded their linens and made sure the fireplaces had wood through November. But she was also now the kind of woman who paid attention to things the people who employed her assumed she was too tired or too grateful to notice. Like the way Gerald changed the gate code every 3 weeks and never told her in advance, just left the new sequence on a sticky note under the kitchen clock, as if she wouldn't wonder why. Like the way certain men came and went from this property without ever being announced, their cars dark and their eyes darker, their conversations conducted in rooms they closed the door to. Like the way the name Victor Montgomery made even grown men shorten their sentences. She had Googled it 4 months ago, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her phone screen turned low. She'd found enough to understand the shape of what she was living inside of, even if she couldn't see all the edges yet. Victor Montgomery, untouchable, unnamed in court filings that nonetheless existed. A son, Ryan 34, who appeared in photographs beside his father at charity galas, with the kind of smile that had been engineered for exactly that purpose. She'd thought about leaving that night. Then she looked at Daniel's medical invoice on her nightstand and made herself do the math again. $1,800 a month, room board, all utilities. She had 31 years old and $47 in her checking account, and a brother who needed a specialist visit every 6 weeks and a ramp modification that would cost $4,000 she did not have. She could think about her dignity, or she could pay the next invoice. She couldn't do both. She put her phone face down on the mattress and gone to sleep. That had been 4 months ago. Tonight, the second week of November, the estate empty, the storm arriving, she was about to discover the exact price of that decision. She was in the kitchen at 9:14 when the lights flickered. Not off, just a stutter, 1 second of uncertainty and then back to steady. But it was enough to make her set down her mug and go still. She had learned in this house to pay attention to the small things. The lights flickered when something was drawing extra power from the main line. Like the gate mechanism opening. She turned off the overhead light, stood at the window over the sink and looked out into the dark. The trees were bending. Not the usual November sway, bending like something enormous was moving through them, with intention, something that didn't care what was in its way. The storm had been building since noon, and it had finally arrived with the kind of authority that made you understand deep in the animal part of your brain that the weather did not care about your plans. And underneath it, underneath the howl of the wind and the percussion of the rain against glass, she heard the sound that changed everything. Not a knock, a fall. Someone hitting the front doors of the estate with the full weight of a body that had run out of options. A heavy, desperate impact that shook the frame and rattled the glass panels and sent a vibration through the floor that she felt in the soles of her feet. She stood at the bottom of the staircase, Gerald's voice in her head, "Don't open the doors for anyone." The sound again, slower this time, weaker. The sound of someone who was losing the argument with gravity. "Don't open the doors." She was across the foyer and had her hand on the bolt before she'd made a conscious decision to move. He fell in. She barely got her shoulder under his arm in time. The full weight of him, and it was substantial, the kind of solid, heavy mass that doesn't apologize for itself, came down on her in a single uncontrolled collapse. And she planted her feet and held because the alternative was both of them on the marble floor. And that wasn't a scenario that ended well for either of them. He was soaked through, not just wet saturated like he'd been walking through the storm for longer than made sense. His coat was black, and the rain had made it shine. And when she grabbed at his jacket to try to stabilize him, her hand came away dark, not from the rain. Hey, she got her palm against his jaw. Hey, look at me. Look at me. His eyes found her, and that was the first thing that surprised her. They found her fast. Not the wandering, unfocused gaze of someone slipping out of consciousness. These eyes were present even now, aware. The eyes of a man who was in tremendous pain and had decided that the pain was not going to win. Sarah, he said her name, her first name, from a man she had seen in exactly 3 photographs on the internet and never in person. You know my name, she said. Gerald keeps files. A swallow, controlled, deliberate. On everyone. She could feel the warmth of his blood against her fingers. Too much warmth. Moving too fast. Can you walk? I walked here. I can see that. Can you walk right now in this building to the kitchen? He tried to pull himself upright, his jaw set. His body betrayed him and dropped another 4 inches. She caught him. Okay, she said, not to him, to herself. The kind of okay that was not okay at all, but was the only word available when the options had just collapsed down to 1. She kicked the door shut behind him. The storm kept screaming outside. It sounded like it was angry about being locked out. She got him to the kitchen. Take off the coat. You can, barely keep your head up. She was already pulling the first aid kit from under the sink, the serious one, the one Gerald had insisted she stock with medical-grade supplies, which she thought was strange at the time and was deeply grateful for now. Take it off or I'm cutting it. That coat cost... I don't care what it could. He looked at her. That same recalibrating look and she'd first seen in the doorway, a man updating his assessment of a situation in real time. Then he started working at the buttons with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. She turned on the under-cabinet lights, bright and low, the kind of light you could work under without lighting up the windows. When she pulled his shirt up to examine the wound properly, she had to breathe through her nose for 3 full seconds before she could speak. Who shot you? She asked. Someone I trusted. How long ago? 40 minutes. Maybe 45. She looked at the exit wound, then at the entry. Through and through, the only mercy in any of this. You drove here, walked the last mile. The car was no longer an option. She pressed gauze against the wound, firm, steady pressure. He exhaled through his teeth, but didn't move. Didn't make a sound beyond that single exhale. She had 2 years of nursing school in her past abandon when Daniel's accident had made everything else feel like a luxury. She had never in her life applied that training to a gunshot wound. She applied it now. You need a hospital, she said. No. Ryan, this is serious, the tissue damage alone. No hospital. Quiet. That was the thing about his voice that made the air in the room feel different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening in any obvious way. It was just the voice of a man who had spent his entire life being obeyed. If my name appears in a hospital system tonight, I'm dead before sunrise. Not from this. He glanced down at the wound, from the people who did it. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. 3rd version of that word tonight. This one meaning I have understood the reality. I am choosing to move inside it. She kept working. 16 minutes. That was how long it took her to clean the wound packet and get it bandaged tightly enough to matter. He didn't speak during most of it, neither did she. There was a particular kind of communication that happened in silence when 2 people were focused on the same urgent problem, a rhythm, a shorthand, and they fell into it without negotiating in it, which was itself a strange thing that she noticed and set aside to think about later. She set a glass of water on the table and amoxicillin from Daniel's last prescription next to it. Not ideal, she knew that, also the best she had. It's not going to kill you, she said. He looked at the pill. How do you know? Because I haven't decided to kill you yet. If I had, I would have left you at the door. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile too controlled for that, an acknowledgement. He picked up the pill and took it. She sat down across from him. Her legs were shaking. She could feel it now that she wasn't moving, a fine, deep tremor that started in her knees and ran up through her hips. Adrenaline doing its honest work. She pressed her feet flat against the floor and breathed until it settled. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. "Why did you come here specifically?" she asked. "The gate code was changed. How did you get through?" "There are no codes on this property I don't know." "Gerald changed it 2 weeks ago." "I know, I told him to." She went still. "You told him to change it." "Yes." Which means she worked through it out loud, watching his face. "You told him to change it because you knew something was coming. You set this property up as a fallback. You came here tonight because it was the one location that was off the books that no one else would know to look for." She paused. "Except someone found out where you were anyway. Someone who knew your plans." The silence in the room changed its quality. "You're not what Gerald's file says you are," Ryan said quietly. "Gerald's file says I'm a housekeeper with a sick brother and overdue bills." "Yes." "He's not wrong." She stood up, moved to refill the kettle. "He's just not seeing all the way through." His phone lit up on the table. She saw his hand reach for it. She saw the hand stop. "What is it?" She didn't turn around, kept her back to him, kept her voice level. "Nothing." "You just stopped breathing for 2 seconds. It's not nothing." A pause. She could hear him making a decision. "There are vehicles on the lower road." 3. Moving toward the property. She set the kettle down. "How many men?" "Minimum 12, probably more." She turned around. He was watching her, not watching her panic, watching her think. Like that was the thing he needed to see, the thing that would tell him whether she was going to be useful or whether she was going to become a second problem. How long before they reached the gate? He checked the phone. 7 minutes, maybe 8. She was already moving. "There's a sub-basement," she said, "behind the main house through the utility corridor. Original root cellar. It was built before the current structure, so it doesn't appear on the county assessor's records. Gerald showed it to me on my first week here. He called it the emergency orientation." She picked up the first aid kit. "I've always thought that was a strange thing to include in an orientation for a housekeeper." Ryan was on his feet, slow, effortful, but upright. "You memorize the county assessor's records." "I like to know where I'm sleeping." She looked at him. "Can you walk or do I need to support you?" "I can walk." "Then we move now. I am." They went through the back of the house in complete darkness, and Sarah discovered something about herself in those 2 minutes that she had never known before. She didn't run. She had always assumed, in the abstract, hypothetical way a person thinks about fear, that her instincts would override everything in a genuine emergency, that the animal in her would take the wheel. She had assumed she would run. Instead, she moved, controlled, deliberate, measuring each step before she took it, keeping the flashlight angled at the floor so it wouldn't catch the windows. And she actually noticed in some calm observer part of her brain that apparently operated independently of terror that Ryan moved the same way. No wasted motion, no hesitation once the decision was made. Whoever had trained him, whatever years of living, had formed this particular set of reflexes in him. They had built a man who did not flinch when the danger became real. She found the utility corridor access on the first try. She got the door open, got him through it, pulled it shut behind them. Her hands were steady. Cold, dark. The smell of old stone and earth. The specific smell of something that had been underground for 100 years and wasn't apologizing for it. She clicked off the flashlight and they stood together at the bottom of the narrow stairs and listened. Above them, the storm. Through the storm, the sound of vehicles. The low, specific sound of engines that had gone quiet in the wrong way, not off, just idle. Waiting. Doors, voices, muffled by structure and distance, but unmistakable in their intent. Men who were looking for something. Men who were used to finding it. Ryan's hand found her arm in the dark. Not a grab of pressure. The kind of contact that means hold. She held. She pressed her back against the stone wall and made herself breathe through her nose slow and even. And she thought about Daniel sitting in his apartment 3 hours south of here, asleep not knowing that the sister who was his only safety net was currently standing underground, waiting for 12 armed men to either find her or move on. I'm not going to leave him without anyone, she thought. It was the most clarifying thought she'd ever had, sharper than fear, stronger than adrenaline. I am going home to my brother. Whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, I am going home. You're not panicking, Ryan said, barely a breath. I'm terrified, she whispered back. I just don't have the time for it right now. A pause in the dark. Why did you open the door, he asked. Gerald told you not to. She thought about it, really thought about it the way you can only think when the adrenaline has simplified everything down to its bones. Because I heard you falling, she said, and I've spent enough of my life walking past people who were falling. Silence. Above them a door opened, footsteps on the floor directly overhead. Heavy, systematic, the footsteps of men who were checking rooms. She did not move. Ryan did not move. And the footsteps moved away, and stopped. And then, after the longest 5 minutes of her life, she heard the vehicles start again, heard them turn, heard the gravel under retreating tires and the sound slowly swallowed by the storm. She exhaled. Ryan's hand didn't move from her arm. They'll be back, he said quietly. They didn't find anything, which means they'll sweep again. We have maybe 2 hours before they return with more men. She turned toward his voice in the dark. Then we used 2 hours, she said. To do what? To figure out who sold you out. She clicked the flashlight back on. Because whoever it was, they knew your contingency. They knew about this property, which means they're close. And close means we can find them before they find us. The light caught his face, and for the first time since he'd fallen through her door, Ryan Montgomery looked at her with something she hadn't seen in those controlled, calculating eyes yet. Something that looked just slightly like being seen by someone who surprised him. You want to investigate, he said. I want to survive, she said. And the only way out of this is through whoever started it. She held the flashlight steady. Now, start talking. Who knew where you were tonight? He looked at her for a long moment, then carefully, like a man unfolding something he'd never shown anyone, he began. He didn't answer immediately. That was the first thing she noticed. Not hesitation. Ryan Montgomery did not hesitate the way ordinary people hesitated, with uncertainty bleeding through the cracks. This was something different. This was a man deciding how much of the truth was safe to hand to another person, measuring it out the way you measure something precious and finite. Sarah waited. She had learned in 6 months on this property that silence was a tool. Most people couldn't stand it and would fill it with something real. 4 people knew where I was tonight, he said finally. My father's head of security, a man named Carver, my driver Marcus, and Gerald. She absorbed that. Gerald. She thought about Gerald Briggs, the thin, nervous man with the sliding eyes and the too flat voice. The man who had told her this morning with a specific and deliberate weight not to open the doors for anyone. Gerald told me to keep the doors locked tonight. He called me personally. He never calls me personally. Ryan's jaw tightened. He was covering himself. Or warning me. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She looked at him. You don't think it was Gerald? Gerald has worked for my father for 19 years. He has a daughter in college and a mortgage in Connecticut, and everything he has comes from this family. He paused. That makes him loyal. It also makes him a liability if someone decided to use what he loves against him. So someone threatened him, or paid him, or both. He shifted his weight slightly. She saw the pain move through him, watched him absorb it without comment. The point is, Gerald is not the source. Gerald is a symptom. Then who's the source? He was quiet for 3 full seconds. In the dark of that cellar, with the storm still working above them and the ghost of those footsteps still hanging in the air, 3 seconds was a very long time. Marcus is dead, he said. I know that for certain. He was in the car when it went off the road on Route 9. That's not a coincidence, that's cleanup. Someone eliminated the driver before he could talk. She felt the cold of the room more acutely. They killed their own asset. It's what you do when you're closing an operation. You don't leave threads. Which means whoever did this isn't finished. No, he said. They are absolutely not finished. She stood up straighter. Her spine made a decision that the rest of her body followed. Carver or your father, she said. Those are your two remaining names. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Heavier, the kind that settles over a room when someone says a true thing that cannot be unsaid. Say the rest of it, she told him. You're already thinking it. My father, Ryan said very quietly, has been the target of an internal power challenge for the last 8 months. Someone within the organization has been positioning to take control, systematically, quietly, moving pieces. He paused. 3 months ago, my father told me he had identified who it was. He said he was handling it. Did he tell you who? No, he said he needed to be certain first. And you trusted that. I trusted that. Something moved across his face, not quite grief, not quite anger. Something older than both. I should not have trusted that. She heard what he wasn't saying, let it sit between them for a moment because it deserved the weight of a moment before she pushed further. You think your father was wrong about who it was, or you think your father was lying about handling it. I think, Ryan said, that the only person who benefits from me being dead tonight is the person who wants to inherit what my father built. And I think the only person who could have coordinated the 3 vehicles that came through that gate tonight is someone my father's security would let through without question. She put it together out loud. Carver runs security. Carver controls access protocols. Carver would know your location, your route, your contingency properties. She looked at him. And Carver reports directly to your father. Yes. So either Carver is acting alone, or your father knows. Ryan looked at the stone wall across from him like he was looking through it through the estate above them, through the storm, through some distance she couldn't measure. I have been asking myself that question, he said for approximately 40 minutes. She made him drink the rest of the water. Not because she was nurturing by nature, she wasn't particularly, but because he needed fluids and she needed something practical to do with her hands, while her mind worked through the geometry of what he'd just told her. The phone in his pocket was a problem. If Carver had access to the security systems, he potentially had access to location tracking. She said as much. Ryan pulled the phone out, looked at it, and did something she didn't expect. He handed it to her. Battery out, she said. Not powered off. Battery out. He didn't argue. He pried the back panel and removed it, and she took the phone and slid both pieces under a loose stone in the cellar floor that she'd noticed on the first week when Gerald had shown her this space. She had always had an instinct for the details other people treated as irrelevant. Do you have another way to reach someone you trust? She asked. Define trust. Someone who won't report your location to Carver or your father in the next 6 hours. He was quiet for a moment. There's a man named Torres. He was my father's before he was mine, old guard, 25 years. He runs the Albany operation, off-grid enough that Carver doesn't loop him into New York communications. Can you reach him without a phone? The estate has a landline, analog, not networked. She looked at him. You know the estate has an analog landline. I know everything about this property. You know about the cellar. Yes. You've been here before. I grew up coming here. My mother liked it in October. He said it simply without embellishment, but she caught the edge of something in it, a door that had been open for half a second and then gently, firmly closed. The landline is in the study on the 2nd floor, northwest corner. I know where it is. She stood up. I'll go. Sarah, you can barely put weight on your left side. I can move through this house without making sound. I've been doing it for 6 months because the floors creak and I didn't want to wake anyone at 2 in the morning. She checked the flashlight battery by clicking it on and off. Still strong. Give me the number. I'll call Torres. Tell me exactly what to say. He looked at her with that expression again, the one she was beginning to recognize. The calculation running behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of variables, and then the moment when the assessment resolved and he made a decision. He gave her the number. Then he reached into his coat, his ruined blood-soaked coat that she'd folded onto the cellar step, and removed something from the interior pocket, a flat, matte black object about the size of a deck of cards. Take this, he said. She took it, turned it over. What is it? Insurance. He met her eyes. If anything happens to me tonight, if I'm gone before Torres arrives, you give that to Torres and only Torres. You tell him where it came from. Do you understand? The weight of it in her hand was out of proportion to its size. Not physically, it wasn't heavy. It was the other kind of weight, the kind that comes from understanding what an object represents without knowing exactly what it contains. What's on it? She asked. Everything, he said. Enough to end Carver. Enough to expose every move that's been made in the last 8 months. Enough to give my father the truth he either couldn't find or didn't want to find. She closed her hand around it. I'll be back in 10 minutes. 8, he said. The patrols outside won't stay away longer than that before they loop back. She was already moving toward the stairs. The house was different at night. Not frightening, she had been alone in it at night for months, but different in the way that all familiar spaces become different when the stakes inside them change. The same floors she had swept 100 times. The same hallways she had walked without thinking. They felt charged now, like the air before lightning makes contact. She moved without the flashlight once she reached the ground floor. She knew the layout well enough. Left at the utility corridor exit through the back kitchen, around the base of the main staircase, up on the right side where the fourth step didn't creak, she'd learned that in week 2. The study door was closed. She opened it without sound, crossed to the northwest corner, found the phone on the desk under a leather-bound journal that hadn't been moved in months. She dialed. It rang 4 times. 5. 6. She counted because counting was the thing that kept her from spiraling into the particular variety of panic that lived at the edge of her attention like a waiting animal. On the 7th ring, someone picked up. Silence. Torres, she said, quiet, certain. The way Ryan had told her to say it, not a question, not a greeting, just the name, so the person on the other end knew she knew who she was calling. A pause, then a voice older, careful, the voice of a man who had answered phones in the middle of the night for 25 years and had learned to gather information before he gave any. Who is this? I'm calling on behalf of someone who needs you in the Catskills before dawn. He says you know the property. He says you're the only person he trusts right now. He says to tell you. She glanced down at the number she'd memorized. He says to tell you the Hudson Protocol. Silence. Different kinds of silence from before. This one had recognition in it. How bad, Torres said. Bad enough that there were 12 men at the gate 2 hours ago. Good enough that he's still talking. Another pause. She could feel the man recalibrating on the other end of the line, the same way Ryan recalibrated the same school of thought, the same trained economy of reaction. 6 hours, Torres said. I can be there in 6 hours. He said 4 is the maximum window before the situation changes. A sharp exhale, decision being made in real time. 4.5, I need to bring the right people. He said to come quiet, nothing that looks official, nothing that Carver's network would flag. The name landed. She heard it land, a fractional pause, the kind you couldn't manufacture or suppress. Torres knew the name. Torres understood immediately what the name meant in this context. Tell him I'm moving, Torres said, and hung up. She held the phone for 1 more second, not because she needed to, just because her hand needed a moment before her body was ready to move again. Then she set it carefully back on the desk under the leather journal, exactly as she'd found it. She was halfway back across the study when she heard the door behind her open. Not the door she'd come through, the other door. He was tall, broader than Ryan, and he was dry, which meant he'd been inside the house before the storm peaked, which meant he'd been inside the house for at least 2 hours, which meant he had come in through an entrance she hadn't known was accessible. He was also holding a phone to his ear and looking directly at her. She's in the study, he said into the phone. His eyes didn't move from her face. Yeah, I've got her. He lowered the phone. Sarah did not run. She stood in the middle of the study floor in her housekeeper's uniform, with Ryan Montgomery's drive in her closed fist, and she looked at this man, and she thought with extraordinary clarity, for someone whose heart was attempting to exit through her sternum, he doesn't know what I'm holding. He doesn't know about the cellar. He doesn't know Ryan is alive. Where is he? The man said. Where is who? She said. The man looked at her the way people look at you when they're deciding whether you're stupid or brave. Ryan Montgomery came to this property tonight. We tracked his signal to the gate before he killed the phone. Where is he? She looked at this man calmly. She thought about Gerald's voice. She thought about Daniel asleep 3 hours south. She thought about the weight of the drive in her palm and what Ryan had said enough to end Carver. And she thought about the fact that this man had said we and was reporting her location to someone on a phone. I haven't seen anyone, she said. I've been alone here since yesterday morning. Gerald can confirm he called me this morning. Gerald's not available. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Gerald's not available. She kept her face very still. I don't know what that means. It means you should be very careful about what you decide to say next. He took one step toward her. Because the people I work for are not patient people, and you are a housekeeper who can very easily disappear from a property during a storm and have nobody wonder about it for days. And there it was. Not a threat in the theatrical sense, not performed, not designed to frighten. Just a fact delivered with the flat certainty of someone who had made people disappear before and found it neither difficult nor remarkable. She felt fear move through her like cold water. She let it, and then she let it pass. I understand, she said. Good. He held out his hand. Give me your phone. She reached into her apron pocket with her left hand, not her right. Her right hand stayed at her side and pulled out her personal cell phone and handed it to him. He checked it. Recent calls, Daniel, 2 days ago. Gerald that morning. Nothing outgoing in the last 4 hours. He handed it back. You're going to stay in this room, he said. You're not going to move. You're not going to make any calls. And if Ryan Montgomery contacts you for any reason, you are going to tell me immediately. He reached into his jacket and set something on the desk, a card blank except for a number. Understood. Understood, she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he walked back out through the door he'd come in from and pulled it shut. She counted to 30. Then she moved. Ryan heard her coming down the cellar stairs before she reached the bottom. She could tell by the way his posture changed the slight release of tension across his shoulders when he confirmed it was her and not someone else. She was grateful for that. She was also grateful that she had the kind of face that could hold still under pressure because she needed it to hold still right now. Torres is moving, she said. 4.5 hours. Good. He read her face. What else? There's a man in the house. He was already inside when I went upstairs, not one of the 12 from earlier, different, already positioned inside. He was reporting my location to someone on a phone. She paused. He told me Gerald is not available. Ryan went very still. He said it exactly like that, he asked. Not available. Exactly like that. Ryan closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, something had shifted in them. Not grief exactly, but the closest thing to it that a man like him would let show. Gerald with his sticky notes and his sliding eyes and his 19 years of loyalty. Gerald who had told her not to open the door. Gerald who had, in his own indirect and frightened way, tried to warn her. He's not coming back, Ryan said. It wasn't a question. I don't think so, she said. I'm sorry. He was quiet. The man in the house doesn't know about this space, she said, pushing forward, because standing still in grief was a luxury neither of them could afford right now. He checked my phone and found nothing. He told me to stay in the study, which means he's covering the upper floors. He's alone, which means he's a watcher. He's here to confirm whether you're on the property, not to take action independently. He's waiting for instructions. Yes, which means whoever he's reporting to doesn't know yet. She looked at Ryan. We have a window, small but real. Torres has 4 hours to reach us. We need to stay invisible for 4 hours. The man upstairs will do another sweep. Yes, so we need to make him believe the property is empty. She thought for a moment. He came in through an entrance I didn't know, which means there's an access point I haven't mapped. If he uses it to leave and report, if he physically leaves the property to meet with whoever he's working for, that gives us more time. Ryan was watching her. You're running tactical analysis. I'm trying not to die, she said. That's all this is. Sarah. The way he said her name, not commanding this time, not the reflex of a man used to directing situations. Something else. Something more careful. Why are you still here? She looked at him. Because you told me the truth, she said, about who shot you, about what's on that drive. You didn't have to. You could have told me anything, a story, a cover, something easier. But you told me the truth, which means you respected me enough to do that. She held his gaze. I don't get a lot of that. I stay where I get that. The silence between them was different this time. Not tactical, not tense. Something quieter. A moment between two people who were beginning, despite everything, to understand each other. Then his expression sharpened. "The man upstairs," he said. "You said he told you to stay in the study." "Yes." "But you're not in the study." "No." "Which means when he checks, and he will check, he'll know you moved. He'll know you lied." She nodded. "I know." That changes his instructions. A housekeeper who's hiding is a housekeeper who knows something. He'll escalate. "I know that too." "Then why?" He stopped, looked at her. The calculation behind his eyes ran its full circuit and arrived at a destination she could see him reach before he said it. "You needed him to escalate. You needed him to call it in. Because when he calls it in, whoever he's reporting to has to respond. And a response takes time and resources and movement. And movement leaves traces." She waited. "You want to follow the trace back to the source," he said. "I want to know if it's Carver acting alone," she said. "Or if your father knows what happened tonight." The air in the room went very quiet. "Because if your father knows," she said carefully, "then the drive you gave me isn't just protection. It's leverage. And the person you need to hand it to isn't Torres." Ryan looked at her for a very long time. "You have been a housekeeper for 6 months," he said. "Yes." "In a house you knew was dangerous." "Yes." "And you are telling me," he said slowly, "that in 6 months you were paying close enough attention to understand that the drive I just gave you could be used to force a negotiation with my father if my father turns out to be behind this." "I'm telling you that I have kept my brother alive for 3 years with $47 and a lot of paying attention," she said. "And yes, Ryan Montgomery, heir to an empire built on ruthlessness and silence and the precise application of power, looked at the woman across from him, the woman in the blood-stained housekeeper's uniform, with the steady hands and the sleeping brother 3 hours south, and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "What's your plan?" And Sarah told him. The plan was simple. That was the thing about it that Ryan didn't entirely trust in his experience. Simple plans either worked perfectly or failed catastrophically with nothing in between. But he also recognized that complicated plans required time and resources, and what they had right now was neither. What they had was each other, a 4-hour window, and a man upstairs who was about to discover that the housekeeper he'd told to stay put had not stayed put. "Walk me through it again," he said. "The man upstairs is a watcher. His job is to confirm whether you're on this property and report back. Right now, he thinks you are not here. He tracked the phone signal to the gate and lost it, which means as far as he knows, you either turn back or you're somewhere he hasn't found yet." She kept her voice low and even, the voice of someone thinking out loud rather than performing confidence. "If I go back upstairs and I'm visibly frightened, not suspicious, just scared the way a housekeeper who just got threatened by a strange man in her employer's house would naturally be scared, he has no reason to change his assessment of me. I'm not a threat. I'm furniture. You're underestimating how quickly that changes if he finds anything out of place. Which is why I need you to tell me everything that could be out of place. Every detail in this house that would tell someone who knows this property that you were here tonight." She looked at him directly. "Think." He did. She watched him run through it, not the slow, uncertain thinking of someone searching for an answer, but the rapid, systematic inventory of a man who had been trained to assess environments for exactly this kind of risk. "The kitchen," he said. "The gauze wrappers, the water glass with my prints, the pill bottle. Already handled. I cleaned the table before we moved, and I put the gauze in the utility corridor trash, which he won't check because it's not a living space." She paused. "What else?" "The front door. I fell against it. There may be a blood transfer on the frame. I wiped it down when I kicked it shut. I didn't know you specifically, but I knew something had happened there, and I cleaned it on instinct." She said it without pride, just as a fact. "What else?" He was quiet for a moment. "Nothing else. You're thorough." "I clean this house. I know every surface." She stood up. "The coat is the only problem." His coat, the black, ruined, blood-saturated coat that was currently folded on the cellar step, was not something she could make disappear before going back upstairs. They both looked at it. "Leave it," he said. If he finds it, the seller is already compromised, and we have bigger problems. If he doesn't come down here, it doesn't matter. He won't come down here, she said. The access door in the utility corridor reads as a maintenance panel from the outside. Gerald painted it the same color as the wall 8 years ago. I only knew to look for it because Gerald told me specifically. A man who was positioned inside this house without Gerald's help doesn't know Gerald's tricks. Ryan looked at her for a moment. You trusted Gerald. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation, and it had weight to it, the specific weight of a shared loss, someone who had meant something to both of them in their different capacities. Gerald with his nervous eyes and his sticky notes, and the 19 years that had apparently not been enough to protect him from the consequence of someone else's war. I trusted him cautiously, she said, which is the only kind of trust that makes sense in a house like this. She picked up the flashlight. I'll be back within 20 minutes. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, I'll come up. You will not come up. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, you wait for Torres and you give him the drive yourself. She met his eyes. Promise me. He didn't answer immediately. Ryan. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't just at the edges, the way a person's eyes give them away when they're asking for something that matters more than they want to show. Promise me. I need to know you'll still be alive when I get back. I promise, he said. She nodded once. Then she went up the stairs. The man was in the kitchen when she walked in, and for one suspended second, neither of them moved. He was standing at the counter with his back to her, and when he turned at the sound of her footsteps, she watched his face go through 3 distinct phases in the space of 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, and then a studied blankness that was worse than either of the first two because it meant he'd made a decision about her, and she couldn't read what the decision was. I thought I told you to stay in the study, he said. I know. She wrapped her arms around herself, not a performance. Her body genuinely needed something to hold on to right now, and her own arms were what was available. I couldn't. I'm sorry. I kept thinking about what you said, and I couldn't just sit there. He looked at her. She let him look. She was a woman in a blood-stained housekeeper's uniform. The blood was Ryan's, but he didn't know that, and in the dark of the cellar it had dried to a color that could pass for anything, and she was visibly shaking, which was not an act. And she was looking at him with the wide, slightly unfocused eyes of someone operating on fear and insufficient sleep. You said Gerald isn't available, she said. Her voice cracked slightly on the name which she hadn't planned but which served her. What does that mean? Gerald has worked here for? He's been here as long as anyone. Did something happen to him? The man watched her. Gerald had an accident, he said. The word accident landed in her chest like a stone. She understood exactly what it meant. She let the understanding show on her face as grief, which wasn't difficult. Because it was grief, because Gerald Briggs, with his coffee thermos and his sliding eyes and his 19 years of impossible loyalty, had apparently reached the end of what loyalty could protect you from, and that was a real thing, a genuinely terrible thing, and she didn't need to manufacture the emotion. Oh God, she whispered. The man studied her reaction. She could feel him processing it, looking for the signs of fabrication, the tells that separated, performed grief from genuine shock. She gave him nothing fabricated because there was nothing fabricated to give. She was genuinely mourning Gerald. She let him see that. You need to sit down, he said. Slightly softer, not kind, not warm, but the pragmatic concession of a man who recognized that a hysterical woman was less useful than a calm one. He pulled out a kitchen chair. She sat. I need water, she said. He poured her a glass from the tap without thinking about it, the reflex of someone who was managing a situation which was exactly what she needed him to feel. That he was managing her, that she was manageable, that the housekeeper with the grief-stricken eyes was exactly what she appeared to be. She drank the water, set the glass down, steadied herself with visible effort. What's your name? She asked. He looked at her. Because you know mine. You've been in my house for 2 hours and you know my name, and I don't know yours, and that doesn't feel right. She looked up at him with eyes that were still wet at the corners. I just want to know who I'm talking to. A pause, then Reed. She filed that away. Reed, she let out a long shaking breath. Is Mr. Montgomery going to know what happened here tonight? Is someone going to call him? Mr. Montgomery is already aware. Which Mr. Montgomery, she asked, and she kept her voice entirely guileless when she said it. Just a confused, grieving woman trying to understand the edges of her situation. Gerald always said there were two, the father and the son. Reed looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted microscopic, but she caught it, filed it, understood it. He'd heard the question as innocent, but the question had not been innocent, and what she had read in the microscopic shift of his face was the answer she had been looking for since Ryan had first said his father's name in the cellar. Reed had said Mr. Montgomery is already aware without specifying which one, and when she'd asked him to clarify, his face had done something involuntary. It was Victor Montgomery, the father, the man whose name was spoken in this house like the name of God. Victor knew what was happening tonight. Victor was already aware, which meant either Victor was the architect of it or Victor was watching it and had decided not to stop it. Neither possibility was better than the other, she breathed. Never mind, she said. I'm sorry, I'm scared and I'm not thinking clearly. She wrapped her hands around the water glass. What do I do now? Do I stay here? Do I leave? You stay, Reed said. You stay quiet, and you let the people who know what they're doing handle the situation. Okay, she said. Okay, yes, I can do that. He nodded. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it, and she watched the careful blankness of his face crack slightly, not dramatically, not obviously, but she was watching for exactly that, and she caught it. Something in the message had surprised him, or alarmed him, or both. He stepped out of the kitchen. She counted to 15. Then she moved. Goya, she went back through the utility corridor and down the cellar stairs faster than she'd come up, and Ryan was already on his feet when she reached the bottom. Not panic, just alert the way an animal comes to attention before it's entirely sure why. Victor knows, she said. He's already aware. Reed, the man upstairs, confirmed it without confirming it. Ryan sat back down, not because he needed to, because something in him needed a moment to settle, and sitting was the physical expression of that. She had seen it before in Daniel in the weeks after the accident, when the reality of what had happened kept arriving in new waves and each one required its own sitting down. How certain are you? He asked. Sure, certain enough. She crouched down to his eye level. Defun. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me without protecting my feelings. Is your father capable of ordering this? The silence that followed was its own answer. But he gave her words too because she'd asked for them. My father has ordered worse, he said, for less. For less than what? Than an heir who was beginning to ask the wrong questions. He looked at the stone floor. Months ago, I started noticing the discrepancies in the accounts, in the territorial reports, small things, the kind that are meant to look like administrative errors. I started documenting. I thought. He stopped. You thought your father didn't know, she said. I thought someone was stealing from him and I was going to be the son who caught it. I thought he'd be grateful. He said the last sentence with a flatness that was more painful than bitterness would have been. I was building a case. I told him 3 months ago that I was building it. I didn't tell him what I'd found yet. I said I needed more time. He said, take all the time you need. A pause. I understand now what that meant. She was quiet. He wasn't being targeted, Ryan said. He was the one doing it, restructuring the finances, rerouting the territories, setting it up so that when the time came, when the right moment came, I would be the one holding the evidence of crimes that look exactly like mine. He looked up at her. He was going to take everything and leave me with the exposure. And when I started building a case, he realized I might actually find the real picture before he finished arranging it. So he decided to close the window, she said. So he decided to close the window. She sat down on the cellar step. The cold of the stone went right through her uniform. She let it because cold was clarifying, and she needed clarity right now more than she needed comfort. The drive, she said, what's actually on it? The real accounts, the actual financial movements for the last 18 months. Proof that the restructuring was his initiative, not mine. Proof that the 3 men who died in the last 6 months, deaths that were attributed to rival action, were eliminated on his direct order because they knew too much. He paused. And a recording. Of what? Of my father 4 months ago telling his lawyer that he intended to, and I'm using his exact words, simplify the succession. The phrase settled over the cellar like smoke. Simplify the succession. That's enough, she said. That's more than enough. That's a federal case. It's more than a federal case. It's the end of everything he built. Ryan looked at her steadily. Which is why the people who have it need to be people who know what to do with it. Torres knows. Torres has connections, legitimate ones, people inside the system who owe him, who can move it through the right channels before my father has time to suppress it. And if Torres doesn't get here in time, then we discuss the other option, which is, you take it, he said. You walk out of here before dawn with the drive, and you get to Daniel, and you get somewhere no one knows to look for you, and you sit on it until I can reach you. She stared at him. You're telling me to run with evidence against Victor Montgomery. I'm telling you that if Torres doesn't arrive, you are the only person on this property who can move freely. Reed doesn't consider you a real variable. My father's people don't know your name. They know you're a housekeeper. You are in the most literal possible sense invisible to them. He held her gaze. Which is the most dangerous thing you could be right now. She thought about that. Thought about the drive in her pocket, the weight of it that had been sitting against her hip for the last 2 hours. Thought about Daniel asleep in his apartment, his ramp, his specialist in Albany, the invoice on the kitchen counter that she hadn't opened yet because opening it made it real. If I run with that drive, she said slowly, I become something. I'm not a housekeeper anymore. I'm a person who has something Victor Montgomery wants. Yes, some. That doesn't just put me at risk, it puts Daniel at risk. Yes, he said again, and he said it the way she'd asked him to say things without protecting her feelings, clean and straight and honest. I know that. I'm not asking you to make that choice tonight. I'm asking you to know it's there. She looked at the drive in her palm. Such a small thing, such an ordinary-looking thing, the kind of object you'd lose in a coat pocket and forget about for months. Tell me about the recording, she said. The one of your father. Where did you get it? I had his office wired for the last 3 months. With Gerald's help. The name sat between them again. Gerald knew, she said. Gerald helped me build the case. He believed as I did that my father didn't know what was happening. When I understood the truth, I told Gerald immediately. He stopped. That was 3 days ago. 3 days ago, and Gerald had been gone for, she looked at her watch. Gerald had been gone for however long not available actually meant in the language of men who made people disappear. He died because he knew, she said. He died because someone found out he'd help me, which means my father had him under surveillance, which means my father has been ahead of this for longer than I understood. Ryan's hands were clasped between his knees. Gerald knew the risk. I told him the risk. He stayed anyway. Why? Ryan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than it had been. He told me that he'd spent 19 years making himself useful to a man who did not deserve it. He said he wanted to spend whatever time he had left doing something that mattered. He paused. He mentioned you. She looked up sharply. He said, Ryan seemed to be choosing his words with particular care. He said that you reminded him of someone who deserved better than the situation you were in. That you were too smart for this house, and that he hoped you got out before he stopped. Before tonight, she thought. Before it reached you, she pressed her lips together hard. Breathed through her nose. Gerald Briggs with his 19 years and his Connecticut mortgage and his daughter in college and his sticky notes and his specific careful act of warning her this morning, don't open the doors for anyone, his last act of protection for a housekeeper who had no idea he was already a dead man when he made that call. He warned me this morning, she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. He called me and he told me not to open the doors. He knew something was coming. He knew it was going to be tonight. He didn't know you'd end up at my door. No, that was not in anyone's plan. Ryan looked at her with something that was close to raw. You were not supposed to be part of this. I know, she said. I opened the door anyway. The cellar went quiet. Above them, the storm was beginning to settle, not gone, but reduced the violent peak of it, giving way to something steadier and lower. She checked her watch, 2 hours and 40 minutes since Ryan had fallen through the front door. Torres had approximately 90 minutes remaining on his window. And then Reed's footsteps crossed the floor directly above them, and both of them went still. The footsteps stopped, right above them. The specific deliberate stop of someone who had found something or noticed something or was standing in a place that meant something. She looked at Ryan. He looked at the ceiling. The footsteps moved again. Toward the back of the house, toward the utility corridor, toward the maintenance panel. She grabbed Ryan's arm. He was already moving, already pulling himself upright with the contained, deliberate motion of a man overriding pain with sheer will. She looked around the cellar for options for anything for the thing she'd missed, and her eyes landed on the loose stone where she'd stashed his phone. Reed's phone had buzzed in the kitchen. Reed had stepped out to take the call. Reed had received new information. And now Reed was walking toward the one place in this house that should have been invisible. Someone had told him. Not about the drive, not about the recording, but about the cellar. Someone who knew Gerald's tricks. Someone who had known this property long enough to know what Gerald would and wouldn't show a new employee on her first week. Someone who had been here before. She turned to Ryan. Who else knew about this cellar? She watched him run through it, and she watched the moment the answer arrived, watched it move through him like a current, watched every controlled, measured, managed expression he wore strip away in the space of 1 second and leave something underneath that she had not seen on his face before. Not fear, worse than fear, recognition. My father, he said, my father and one other person. He looked at her. Torres. The word hit her in the chest. She had called Torres 1 hour and 15 minutes ago. She had given him this location, this property, and the Hudson Protocol, the code word Ryan had specifically chosen for the one man he trusted. She had sent Torres the signal, and now Reed was walking toward the maintenance panel. Torres isn't coming to help you, she said. The words came out of her mouth with a terrible, careful certainty. Torres is already here. Ryan's jaw set hard. How long ago did Reed's phone go off? 20 minutes. 20 minutes? He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he opened them, and they were clear and hard and certain in a way that was almost frightening. 20 minutes is enough time to move from the lower road to the property if you were already staged nearby. He looked at her. He was never 6 hours away. He was already positioned. He was waiting for confirmation of my location. She understood it completely in that moment, the entire architecture of the night collapsing into its actual shape. Torres hadn't been a lifeline. Torres had been the close of the trap. The reason Ryan had been sent to this specific property on this specific night was because this property had a cellar, and Torres knew about the cellar, and if Ryan survived the initial attack and ran to his contingency location, Torres would be the one to finish it. And she had called him. She had given him everything he needed. I handed him to you, she said. I handed you to him. You didn't know. I should have. You couldn't have known. I didn't know. His voice was sharp, not unkind, the voice of someone cutting off a line of thought because there's no time for it. What I need right now is for you to think. Not about what you should have done, about what we do next. The maintenance panel rattled. The sound of someone on the other side finding the mechanism, understanding how it worked. She had exactly the time it took a man to open a door. She looked at Ryan, he looked at her, and in the compressed electric space of that moment, the cellar, the rattling door, the storm settling outside, Gerald gone, Torres, coming, Torres already here, Victor already aware of the drive in her pocket. Daniel 3 hours south, she made a decision. Not the decision of a woman who had run out of options. The decision of a woman who had just understood for the first time exactly what she had. Get behind me, she said. Ryan stared at her. What? Get behind me and don't speak until I say your name. She turned to face the door, pulled the drive from her pocket, held it up where it would be seen the moment the door opened. I have something Torres needs, something no one else can give him, and he needs to know I know what it is before he decides what to do with either of us. Sarah, you can't negotiate with. Watch me, she said. The door opened. The man who came through that door was not what she expected. She had built Torres in her mind from Ryan's words. Old guard, 25 years Albany operation, the one man he trusted. She had imagined someone weathered and deliberate, the kind of man whose age showed in his eyes more than his face. What she got was a man of about 50 with silver at his temples and a quality of stillness that reminded her uncomfortably of Ryan himself. Not the stillness of calm, the stillness of someone who had learned over decades that moving when you didn't need to was a waste of resources. He saw the drive immediately. She had held it at exactly the right height, exactly the right angle, visible, intentional, unmistakable. And she watched his eyes register it, and she watched him stop. Reed was 2 steps behind him. Reed saw the drive a half-second later, and his hand moved toward his jacket. "Don't," Torres said, not loud. Reed's hand stopped. Torres looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her, and she knew without turning around that Ryan had straightened up behind her, had made himself visible, and was meeting Torres's eyes over her shoulder. "Ryan," Torres said. "You staged here early," Ryan said. His voice was flat and controlled, and she could hear the precision it took to keep it that way. "You were already on the lower road when she called." Torres said nothing. 20 years, Ryan said. "You've known me since I was 14 years old." "I know," Torres said, and the 2 words carried something in them, not quite remorse, not quite justification, something in between the specific emotional register of a man who had made a choice he understood the weight of and had made it anyway. She kept the drive up. "I know what's on this," she said. "I know what the recording is. I know what the financial records show. And I know," she paused, measuring the words the way Ryan had measured his earlier, "that the moment this leaves my hand, I have no value to anyone in this room. So before anyone makes a decision about what happens next, I need you to understand that I have already made arrangements." Torres looked at her. "What arrangements?" "If I don't make a specific call before 6 a.m., a copy of everything on this drive goes to 3 separate recipients. 2 of them are journalists. One of them is a federal prosecutor in the Southern District who has been building a case against Victor Montgomery for 4 years. She held his gaze. "I made those arrangements 20 minutes ago while Reed was on his phone." Ryan said nothing behind her. He was good at that, at receiving new information in real time without reacting visibly. She was grateful for it. Torres tilted his head slightly. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," she said. "Is maybe good enough odds for you?" The silence in the cellar had weight and texture in a specific temperature. She could feel Ryan behind her, not touching, not close, but present in the way that mattered, the way that said, "I am here and I am watching, and I have not left you in this alone." Torres looked at the drive. Then he looked at her face. Then he did something she did not expect. He sat down on the cellar step. Not a performance, not a tactical repositioning. An actual sitting down, a man whose legs had made a decision independent of his dignity because some part of him had just reached the end of something. "Victor called me 6 months ago," Torres said. "He told me Ryan was skimming, that he'd found evidence. He said he needed someone Ryan trusted to manage the situation quietly, to protect the family name." She heard Ryan's breathing change behind her. Just slightly, just enough. "He told you Ryan was stealing from him," she said. "He showed me records, transfers, account numbers. It looked," Torres stopped. "It looked real. Victor has never lied to me in 20 years. I had no reason to." He stopped again. "The records were fabricated," Ryan said. His voice was very quiet. "My father built a case against me the same way I was building one against him. Parallel construction. He knew I'd found something, so he manufactured a mirror image of it with my name attached." Torres looked at the floor. "He told me it needed to look like rival action," Torres said. "He said to make it clean. He said Ryan wouldn't suffer. He said the last sentence the way you say a thing that sounded different 6 months ago than it does now. I told myself it was the family, that the family had to survive, that Ryan would have understood if he'd known what was at stake." "What did my father tell you was at stake?" Ryan asked. "He said you were going to expose him, that you had evidence that would take down the entire organization, that you were going to hand it to the feds to save yourself from the skimming charges." Torres looked up. "He said you'd chosen yourself over everything he'd built. The geometry of it was so clean it was almost elegant. Victor had told Ryan that someone internal was moving against him. Victor had told Torres that Ryan was moving against the family. 2 truths constructed from the same lie pointed in opposite directions, each one making perfect sense to the man who heard it. "He used you," she said to Torres. "He used the fact that you trusted him and the fact that you loved this family to make you do what he couldn't do himself." Torres was quiet. "The recording," she said. "Ryan told me there's a recording of Victor telling his lawyer he intended to simplify the succession. Did you know about that?" Torres looked up sharply. She had hit something. She could see it, the sharpness of a man who had just heard a piece of information that rearranged other pieces he'd been carrying for a long time. "What lawyer?" Torres said. "Not to her. To Ryan." "Fitch," Ryan said. "Everett Fitch, Manhattan office." Torres stood up slowly. "Everett Fitch has been Victor's personal counsel for 8 years," he said. "He also represents the 3 board members of Montgomery Capital who have been quietly acquiring secondary shares for the last 12 months. He looked at Ryan. "I didn't connect it because I had no reason to connect it. But if Victor was telling Fitch he intended to change the succession and Fitch's other clients were buying shares, then this isn't just about eliminating me," Ryan said. "It's a full transfer. My father is selling the organization to the board members through Fitch." He paused. "And the transfer required me to be gone first because I'm the only one withstanding to contest it." The seller went very quiet. She lowered the drive slightly, not all the way, just enough to acknowledge that the conversation had changed shape. "How many people does Victor have on this property tonight?" Ryan asked Torres. Torres looked at him directly. She could see him making a decision, watching it move across his face in slow, visible layers, the way decisions move across the faces of people who have stopped pretending to be uncomplicated. "Reed and 4 others in the tree line on the east side, 3 more staged at the lower gate." He paused. "And Victor himself." The temperature in the room dropped. "He's here," Ryan said. "He arrived 40 minutes ago. He said he wanted to confirm it personally." Torres looked at the floor again. "I've been doing this for 25 years. I have never not once second-guessed an order from Victor Montgomery." He looked up. "I am second-guessing it now." She looked at Torres and she thought about Gerald. Gerald, who had spent 19 years in service to a man who didn't deserve it and had spent his last 3 days trying to make it matter. She thought about the way loyalty worked in the world of these men, not the sentimental kind, not the kind that showed up in greeting cards, but the old weight-bearing kind that held entire structures upright until the structure itself rotted through. "Torres," she said, "I need you to answer me honestly. Not strategically. Honestly." He looked at her. "Do you believe Ryan was stealing from his father?" A long pause. "No," Torres said. "I believed it when Victor told me. I stopped believing it at approximately 10 minutes after I came through that door and saw a man who had been shot and left for dead sitting in a root cellar while a woman I've never met held a drive between me and him like it was the only thing standing between both of them and the end of the world." He looked at her steadily. "No, I don't believe it." "Then help us," she said, simply, directly, the way you ask for something when you've stripped all the strategy out of it and gotten down to the actual ask. Not for Ryan, not for the organization, because an innocent man is going to die in this cellar if someone doesn't make a different choice. Torres looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Torres. 20 years of something complicated and real and now broken sat between them in the cold air of the root cellar, and she stood in the middle of it and held the drive and waited. "What do you need?" Torres said. So the plan she'd told Ryan about in the cellar 40 minutes ago had assumed Torres was an ally arriving from the outside. This was different. This was a man with operational knowledge of the property, 4 armed men in the tree line, and a direct line to Victor Montgomery, who was somewhere in this building right now. Different problem. Different tools. "Victor is here to confirm," she said. "He hasn't acted yet. He's waiting for Torres to report." "Correct," Torres said. "If Torres reports that the property is clean, that you weren't here, that the search found nothing, Victor has no reason to escalate. He'll verify. How? He'll want to see Reed. He'll want a direct confirmation." "Can Reed be managed?" Torres looked at Reed. Reed had been standing in the cellar doorway for the last 5 minutes with the expression of a man who had understood somewhere in the last 10 minutes that the job he'd signed up for and the job he was currently in were not the same job. He was young, younger than she'd initially registered, mid-20s maybe, with the particular look of someone who had joined something for reasons that had made sense at the time. "Reed," Torres said. "You were hired through Carver's network, correct?" Reed said nothing. "That means Victor doesn't know your face directly. He knows your name, your file. He doesn't have a personal relationship with you." Torres' voice was even factual, the voice of a man who had spent 25 years understanding exactly how information moved through organizations. "If I tell Victor that you confirm the property is clean, he has no reason to doubt it." Reed looked at Torres, then he looked at Ryan. Then, and this was the moment, the small human moment that none of them could have predicted, he looked at her. He said it was clean work, Reed said. His voice was younger than she expected. Carver told me it was a rival situation, that the target had been that it was already handled and I was just here to secure the property. It wasn't a rival situation, she said, and it wasn't already handled. The man behind you was shot by his own father's people and walked a mile through a storm with a bullet wound to get to the one place he thought was safe. She held Reed's gaze. You're 20-something years old and then you're standing in a cellar deciding what kind of person you are. I've been standing in this cellar making that same decision all night. It's not comfortable, but it's the only decision that actually matters. Reed looked at the floor. Then he nodded. She exhaled. Torres reports the property clean, she said. Victor leaves. We have a window, small but real, to get Ryan out and get the drive to someone who can actually move it through the right channels before Victor understands what happened. She looked at Torres. Who can you reach tonight, legitimate? Someone inside the system who can act on this before morning. Torres thought for exactly 3 seconds. There's an AUSA in Albany, Assistant United States Attorney. She's been building a parallel case on the financial side for 2 years. She's not in anyone's pocket because she came from outside. She transferred in from the Western District 18 months ago before Victor's people had time to establish the right relationships. He looked at Ryan. I've been watching her build it. I've been watching it in case I ever needed to know. In case you ever needed to turn, Ryan said quietly. Torres said nothing, which was its own answer. Call her, Sarah said. Right now. Use the analog line in the study. Tell her you have a witness, a recording, and 18 months of financial documentation. She handed Torres the drive. Tell her she has until sunrise. Torres took the drive. He held it for a moment with the careful, specific gravity of a man receiving something he understood the weight of. Then he looked at her. You said you made arrangements before 6 a.m. I said I made arrangements, she said. I didn't say what kind. Torres almost smiled. Almost. You were bluffing, he said. I was buying time, she said. There's a difference. He went up the stairs. Reed left 2 minutes later to take his position at the front of the property with instructions from Torres delivered in a tone that contained 25 years of organizational authority. When he was gone, it was just the two of them again, her and Ryan in the coal cellar with the storm reduced to something quieter above them, and the sound of Torres's footsteps moving through the house overhead. Ryan sat back down. The pain had been building. She could see it in the careful way he moved the slight tension around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 hours ago. The adrenaline that had been holding him together was beginning to negotiate terms. How's the wound, she asked. Functional. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. She crouched in front of him and checked the bandaging without asking permission. It had held better than she'd expected, honestly. No fresh bleeding. The amoxicillin was doing whatever amoxicillin could do for a wound that really needed a surgeon, a hospital, and about 4 days of IV antibiotics. When this is over, she said, not looking up from the bandage, you need a real doctor, not a housekeeper, with 2 years of nursing school and good instincts. When this is over, he said, I'll have access to the best doctors in the Northeast. Good, she sat back. Don't forget that you said that. He looked at her for a moment. You told Torres you'd made arrangements, copies of the drive to journalists and a federal prosecutor. Yes. You hadn't actually done that. No. You invented it on the spot. I had about 4 seconds. I worked with what I had. Where did you get the name Southern District 4-year case against my father? She looked at him. I Googled your family 4 months ago. There was a dismissal notice in a court filing index, a case that got dropped on procedural grounds. The case number was Southern District. The attorney of record had a federal title. She paused. I didn't know if the case was still active. I assumed 4 years was enough time for someone determined to rebuild it. Ryan stared at her. You read a court filing index, he said. I was very thorough when I Googled your family. Most people, he said carefully, would not retain a procedural dismissal notice from a 4-month-old internet search under conditions of extreme stress and deploy it as a bluff against a man who has been in organized crime for 25 years. Most people, she said, didn't grow up doing their little brother's insurance appeals at 17 because their mother wouldn't and their father was gone, and if nobody read the fine print, then nobody got anything. She met his eyes. I read everything. I always have. It's just never mattered this much before. Something moved in his face. Past the pain, past the control, past the specific, incultivated distance that a man in his position wore the way other men wore watches. Something that was closer to the surface than anything she had seen from him tonight. What did Daniel's accident cost you, he asked. Not medically, you. What did it cost you? She was quiet for a moment. My last 2 years of school, she said. The job I'd been interviewing for, I was 2 rounds in, almost there. A relationship I was in that didn't survive me moving home. The version of my life I'd been planning since I was about 14. She paused. I don't say that with bitterness. Daniel didn't ask for any of it. He would be horrified if he knew it how much he already carries enough guilt about the accident. She looked at Ryan steadily. I say it as a fact. Those are the facts of my life. And I built something different from what I had. And the something different is what got both of us through tonight, So, Ryan said softly. She looked at him and she saw him seeing her, not the housekeeper, not the useful civilian, not the woman who had happened to be at the door when he fell through it. Just her. The specific, actual, fully formed person she was. She was not used to being seen that completely, and it was uncomfortable, and she did not look away. My father, Ryan said, has never once in my life looked at a person the way you just described looking at your brother. She didn't answer. I used to think that was just how he was built, that some people are built for that and some aren't. He paused. I understand now that it's a choice, that every day of my life he made a choice to look at me as a resource and not a person, and he got so good at it that I stopped noticing. He looked at his hands. I noticed tonight. When I understood what he'd done, I thought it would feel like betrayal. It felt like recognition. Like I had finally understood something I'd always known, but refused to name. Above them, she heard Torres's voice low, careful, the specific register of a man talking to someone he needed to convince. The analog line, the AUSA in Albany. She checked her watch. 3:47 in the morning, 90 minutes to first light. Torres is good, she said quietly. He's the best I've ever seen at moving people toward a decision they were already close to, Ryan said. If she's been building a case for 2 years, she's already close. She just needs the last piece, which we just handed her, which you just handed her. He looked up. I gave you the drive. But everything that happened tonight after I fell through your door, Torres Reed, the bluff, the AUSA, that was you. We did that together. You did that, he said, not generously, accurately. I was bleeding on a cellar floor. You were running the operation. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then from directly above them, from the direction of the main foyer, a sound she had not heard tonight and had hoped not to hear. A voice, not Torres, not Reed, not the storm. A voice she recognized from nothing personal and from every piece of tone and authority she had absorbed in 6 months of living in a house that moved at this man's frequency. Victor Montgomery was in the building, and he was not waiting for a report. He was moving through the house himself, calling for Torres, and his voice had the specific quality of a man who had decided that confirmation from a distance was no longer sufficient. Victor was coming to see for himself. She looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at the ceiling. He doesn't trust Torres anymore either, Ryan said. He never trusted anyone fully. He just needed them until he didn't. How long before he reaches this floor? 2 minutes, maybe less. She stood up. Every plan she had built in the last 4 hours had accounted for Victor being elsewhere on the property. It had not accounted for this for the architect of the night, walking the same floors, breathing the same air 30 seconds from the utility corridor and the maintenance panel, and the man his architect had been meant to bury. She looked at Ryan. His face was set and clear and terrible in its clarity. There's only one move, he said. I know, she said. You don't have to. I know what I have to do, she said. Stay here, stay quiet. Do not come up those stairs. Sarah, I survived everything else tonight, she said. I can survive 5 minutes with your father. She picked up the flashlight, clicked it off, stood in the dark for one breath, two, grounding herself in the cold and the stone, and the sound of Daniel's voice in her memory. You're the toughest person I know, Sarah. I mean that, and then she went up the stairs. She pushed the maintenance panel open. stepped into the utility corridor, smoothed her uniform with both hands, took a breath that she pulled from somewhere deeper than her lungs, and walked straight toward Victor Montgomery. He was in the hallway at the end of the corridor, flanked by two men she hadn't seen before, and he was exactly what 20 years of living in the shape of his absence had made him. 63 years old, silver-haired, the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more permanent than handsome, authoritative, in the bone structure, in the posture, in the way his eyes moved to her immediately and assessed her in the time it took most people to register that someone was there at all. "You're the housekeeper," he said. "Yes, sir," she said. "Sarah Turner." Victor Montgomery looked at her the way he probably looked at everything, like a man calculating value and deciding how much something was worth to him. She stood in the hallway in her blood-stained uniform at 3:50 in the morning, and she looked back at him and she thought about every single thing she knew about this man, every account she'd read, every implication she'd absorbed, every choice he had made that had brought them both to this corridor at this hour. And then she thought about the drive, upstairs with Torres, traveling through the analog line to Albany, the AUSA who had been building her case for 2 years. And she smiled at Victor Montgomery, warm and simple and completely unremarkable. The smile of a housekeeper who was relieved to see someone in authority on a frightening night. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, "I'm so glad someone is here. It has been a terrible night." He looked at her. She held the smile. "I heard there was an incident with the gate," she said. "I've been so frightened. Gerald called this morning and told me to stay inside, and then I couldn't reach him all evening. And then strange men were at the door, and I've just been, can you tell me what's happening? Is everything all right?" Victor Montgomery studied her face for a long moment. She did not flinch. She had been practicing for years the specific art of being exactly what someone expected to see. The woman in front of him was a housekeeper, tired, frightened, grateful for reassurance, utterly without threat. She was furniture. She was background. She was the woman Gerald's file described, and no more. "Everything is under control," Victor said. His voice was exactly what she'd expected. Smooth, certain, the voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be obeyed. "There was a security concern on the property. It's being handled." "Oh, thank goodness." She pressed one hand to her chest. Is there anything I can do? Should I make coffee? I can make coffee for your men. They must be cold." "That won't be necessary." He was already looking past her, looking down the corridor. His eyes moved with the specific trained sweep of a man inventorying a space. "Have you been in the utility corridor tonight?" "I went to check the generator," she said, "about 2 hours ago. Mr. Briggs always says to check the generator when the storm peaks." She paused, let a small shadow of grief cross her face. "I tried to call him to ask if I should do anything else, but he didn't answer. Is he all right?" Victor looked at her again. She held the grief on her face. Not performed, real. Because Gerald was real and the grief was real, and the only difference between this moment and every other moment tonight was that right now the grief was doing double duty. "Gerald is fine," Victor said. The lie was smooth and complete and cost him nothing. She nodded as if she believed it. She stored it in the part of her brain where she kept the things that mattered, along with the recording Torres was right now transmitting to Albany, along with the financial records, along with the specific and exact price that a father had decided his son's life was worth. "Go back to your room," Victor said. "Stay there until morning." "Yes, sir," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I'm sorry for any trouble." She walked back down the hallway. She did not hurry. She did not look back. She turned the corner and was out of his line of sight, and she kept walking, measured, even unhurried, until she reached the kitchen and the kitchen door and the pre-dawn dark of the estate grounds and the first cold breath of outside air on her face. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed until they stopped. From upstairs, she heard Torres's voice rise slightly confident, deliberate, to the voice of a man delivering a prepared report. And underneath it, just barely, the electronic hiss of an open line. Albany was still on. She looked at the sky, first gray at the eastern edge, 40 minutes to sunrise. She went back to Ryan. She came down the cellar stairs, and Ryan read her face before she said a single word. That was something she had noticed about him over the course of this night, the way he processed people. Not coldly, not clinically, but with the particular attention of someone who had learned early that faces told the truth that words were designed to conceal. He had grown up in a family where the distance between what was said and what was meant could get you killed. He had learned to read the gap. He believed you, Ryan said. He believed what he expected to see. She sat down on the cellar step, her legs finally demanding something from her that she could no longer negotiate around. The shaking in her hands had stopped, but it had moved somewhere deeper into her chest, into her breathing, the delayed arrival of everything her body had been holding at bay for the last 4 hours. Torres is still on the line. I heard the connection when I came back through the kitchen. How much time does he need? I don't know. I don't know how these things work, how long it takes to transmit documentation, how long it takes a federal attorney to understand what she's receiving at 4 in the morning. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. How long did it take you to understand what your father had done? He was quiet for a moment. I've been understanding it for 8 months without knowing I was understanding it. Then give Torres the time he needs. Ryan nodded. Then he looked at her carefully. What did my father say to you? He told me Gerald was fine. The 2 words landed between them with the specific weight of a particular kind of cruelty, the casual, effortless cruelty of a man who lied the way other people breathe, without cost, without friction, without even the courtesy of knowing it was cruel. He looked at me, she said, the way people look at furniture, like I was part of the house, like I had exactly as much interior life as the walls. She paused. I have never in my life been so grateful to be underestimated. Ryan looked at her steadily. He's made that mistake before, with people he should have taken seriously. Has it ever worked out badly for him? Until tonight, no. She almost smiled. Almost. Overhead, she heard movement, multiple sets of footsteps, the kind of coordinated movement that meant something had been decided. She and Ryan both went still. Both tilted their heads upward in the same instinctive gesture, both counting the weight and direction of what was happening above them. 2 sets of footsteps moving toward the front of the house. 1 set stationary near the study. Then the sound she had been listening for since she came back downstairs. Torres's voice, sharp and specific, the voice of a man delivering a final sentence to someone on the other end of a call. And then quiet. The line had closed. She looked at Ryan. He's done. Yes. Is that good? It depends on what she said. Ryan stood up slowly. The pain was visible now in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just the honest exhaustion of a body that had been asked to do too much for too long. If she's moving on it, Torres will come down here. If she needs more time, he'll stall. He paused. If something went wrong, something didn't go wrong, she said, not because she knew. Because she needed them both to operate as if it hadn't, and the difference between knowing and needing was something she had learned to manage a long time ago. The maintenance panel opened. Torres came down the stairs. He moved differently than he had the first time the set of his shoulders had changed. The quality of his stillness had changed. She had spent enough of the night reading people to understand that what had changed was the weight he was carrying. An hour ago, it had been the weight of a decision he hadn't fully made yet. Now it was the weight of a man who had crossed a line he couldn't uncross and had chosen to stand on the other side of it. She's moving, Torres said. She's been ready for 8 months. What we gave her was the last piece of physical evidence she needed to get a judge to sign off on the warrants. He looked at Ryan directly. She wants you in Albany by 9 a.m., both of you. Ryan nodded. Both of us, Sarah said. You're a witness, Torres said. To the attempt, to the drive, to the conversation in this cellar. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something between respect and something more complicated, the look of a man recalibrating his understanding of what a person could be. You're also the person who made the call tonight that made all of this possible. That matters. It'll matter in a courtroom. She absorbed that. A courtroom. Her name in a proceeding against Victor Montgomery. Her brother's name potentially once someone started pulling threads. The version of her life that had begun 6 months ago with 2 duffel bags and a desperate yes had just taken another turn she hadn't seen coming, and this one was permanent in a way that the last 6 months hadn't been. What happens to Victor? She asked. The warrants cover him, Fitch, the 3 board members, and Carver, Torres said. Once the warrants are signed, federal marshals move. Victor won't have time to reach his contingencies. He paused. He'll know something went wrong by dawn, but by dawn it won't matter. He told me Gerald was fine, she said. I want that on record. The specific lie, the specific moment. I want it documented. Torres looked at her. It will be. Gerald worked for this family for 19 years, she said. He deserves to have his name said correctly in whatever happens next. He deserves. She stopped, breathed. He deserves to not disappear. I'll make sure of it, Torres said. And he said it with the weight of a man who understood that this was not a courtesy she was asking for, but a debt that was owed. Victor left the property at 4:41 in the morning. She knew because Reed came down to the cellar to tell them Reed, who had spent the last hour stationed at the front of the property, performing the job he'd been assigned, while the ground beneath the entire operation quietly gave way. He looked younger in the gray pre-dawn air that came through when Torres opened the panel. He looked, she thought, like someone who had aged several years in one night and was still in the process of understanding what he'd become on the other side of it. He got a call, Reed said. I don't know from who. He talked for about 2 minutes and then he told his men to move out. He looked. Reed paused, searching for the word. He looked like he'd heard something he wasn't expecting. She and Ryan looked at each other. The warrants, Ryan said quietly. Someone in his network got wind of the warrants moving. Is that a problem? She asked. It depends on how fast he can move. Ryan looked at Torres. How fast can he move? His liquid assets are accessible within hours. His physical movement. Torres calculated visibly. He has a plane, private, Teterboro. If he gets there before the federal hold goes on his travel documents, he's gone. The word gone had a very specific shape in the air of that cellar. Torres, Ryan said, call your AUSA back. Right now, tell her he's moving. Torres was already heading for the stairs. She looked at Ryan. His face was set and still, and she could see underneath it, not clearly, not completely, but enough the particular pain of a man who had spent his entire adult life building toward an inheritance that had just revealed itself to be a trap and was now watching the architect of that trap potentially walk free through a window that had opened 60 seconds ago. He might get out, she said, not as a question, as a fact she was handing him because he deserved the facts without softening. He might, Ryan said, and if he does, then I spend the next several years making sure the legal structure that Torres's AUSA is building is airtight enough to reach him wherever he goes. He looked at her. And I make sure that anyone who helped him is held to account, and anyone who was hurt by him is made whole, and the organization that he built from other people's suffering is dismantled piece by piece until there's nothing left of it that can hurt anyone else. He said it without drama, without performance, like a list, like a man who had just discovered his life's actual work and was taking the first inventory of what it would require. She looked at him for a moment. That's not a small thing. No, it's not. It'll take years. Yes. And while you're doing it, you'll be the man whose father tried to have him killed. That follows you. It defines how people see you inside the organization, outside it, in any room you walk into. I know. Does it matter to you how people see you? He thought about it, genuinely thought about it the way he thought about everything completely without shortcuts. It matters that the people I'm responsible for see me accurately. Not well, accurately. He paused. My father spent his life making sure people saw him a specific way. He built the image and maintained it, and it cost him everything real. I don't want that. He looked at her. I would rather be seen clearly and judged honestly than protected by a version of myself that isn't true. She thought about that, about the 6 months she had spent in this house being seen as furniture, about the years she had spent being seen as the responsible one, the capable one, the one who handled things, which was its own kind of invisibility, the invisibility of being reduced to your function. I know what it feels like, she said, to be seen as what you're useful for instead of who you are. I know you do. He held her gaze. I see you, Sarah. I want you to know that. Not the housekeeper, not the useful civilian who happened to be at the door. You, the woman who read court filing indexes on a slow Tuesday and deployed them as tactical bluffs at 4 in the morning. A pause. The woman who stayed when she should have run and ran the whole operation from a root cellar and walked straight up to my father's face and smiled at him like he was someone she was relieved to see. She felt something in her chest shift, not dramatically quietly the way the most important things always moved. "You're going to be fine," she told him. "After all of this, the legal case, the organization, whatever comes next. You're going to be fine because you know what you're actually made of now, and you can't unknow it." He looked at her for a long moment. "Are you going to be fine?" She opened her mouth, stopped, thought about it honestly the way he'd been honest with her all night. "I don't know what my life looks like after this," she said. "I was a housekeeper 6 hours ago. Now I'm a federal witness. I have a brother who needs a specialist in 6 weeks, and I don't have a job anymore because I'm fairly certain this position no longer exists." She paused. "But I've been rebuilding from nothing before. I know how it works. You start with what's true, and you build from there." "What's true right now?" he asked. "Daniel is alive, and he doesn't know any of this happened," she said. "That's the best true thing I have at 4:45 in the morning." Torres came back down the stairs faster than he'd gone up. "She got the travel hold on his documents," Torres said. 15 minutes ago. The warrants are signed and federal marshals are moving on Teterboro right now." He looked at Ryan. "He's not going anywhere." The silence that followed was the cleanest silence of the entire night. Not the silence of threat or of held breath or of two people waiting to see if they were going to survive the next 10 minutes. Just quiet. The quiet of something enormous finally stopping. Ryan closed his eyes for 2 seconds. She watched his chest rise and fall with a breath that was different from every breath he'd taken since she'd first pulled him through the front door, not controlled, not managed, just breath. Just the simple animal fact of breathing when the worst has passed. He opened his eyes. "Okay," he said, and this time the word meant something entirely different. Not the desperate okay of a woman deciding to carry an injured man through a storm. Not the tactical okay of choosing to move inside an impossible reality. This was the okay of a morning that had arrived when it had no reason to on the other side of a night that had tried everything it had. At 5:15, Torres drove them out through the back gate in a car that Reed had staged on the service road, the one that didn't appear on the county maps, the one that Gerald had shown her on the third day as a footnote to her orientation, the one she had mentioned to no one and now was profoundly grateful for. She sat in the back seat. Ryan sat beside her. Outside the window, the storm had reduced itself to a cold, steady drizzle, the long, patient rain that comes after violence cleaning what it can. She texted Daniel from the car. Just 3 words, "I'm okay. Love you." She knew he was asleep. She knew he wouldn't see it until morning. She sent it anyway because she needed to send it, needed the small, physical act of reaching across the distance to the person who mattered most. His response came back in 4 minutes, which meant he'd been awake. "Why are you up at 5 a.m.? Are you actually okay?" She smiled. "Type back. Long night. Tell you everything later. Go back to sleep. You're my big sister, I know, when you're lying about being fine." She laughed. Quietly, genuinely, the kind of laugh that arrives when your body has been holding tension for so long that the release has nowhere else to go. Ryan looked at her. "My brother," she said. He nodded. And she could see on his face, not envy exactly, but something adjacent to it, the expression of a man who had just understood what it felt like to be known by someone who loved you without conditions and was recognizing the shape of what he'd never had. She typed back to Daniel, "I'm genuinely okay. Better than okay. I'll explain in person. Save Saturday." She put the phone down. "I need to ask you something," Ryan said. Quiet, careful. The voice of a man who had spent the whole night earning the right to ask. "Off for Albany. After the testimony, the legal process, all of it, what do you want?" She looked at him. "I mean it specifically," he said. "For what do you need? What do you want?" "For yourself, for Daniel. If the obstacles were removed, the bills, the debt, the job you took because you had no other option. What does the actual life you want look like?" Nobody had asked her that in years. She understood in the moment of being asked it exactly how long it had been since anyone had directed that question at her. Not what do you need, not what can you manage, not what will you sacrifice, but what do you want? The question sat in her chest like something warm. "I want to finish my degree," she said. "Nursing. I was 2 years in when I came home for Daniel. I want to finish it, and I want to work somewhere I can actually use it." She paused. "I want Daniel to have the ramp modification and the van and the specialist visits without me doing math at midnight every month to figure out how to make it work." She paused again. And I want 1 year where I'm not operating in survival mode. Just 1 year where the next problem isn't already waiting before I've finished the current one. Ryan nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I'm going to need people I trust around me. In the next phase, the legal process, the reorganization, the work of dismantling what my father built and building something in its place that doesn't run on the same fuel. He looked at her directly. I don't mean in the organization. I mean in my life. People who will tell me the truth when I need it and who see the whole picture and who don't reduce themselves to what they're useful for. He held her gaze. I'm not offering you a job, Sarah. I'm telling you that after tonight, I don't want to lose the clearest thinker I've ever been in a room with. She looked at him for a long time. That's a very complicated thing to say to someone at 5:30 in the morning, she said. I know, I'm saying it anyway. She looked out the window at the gray beginning of the day. The early light coming through the drizzle, the specific pale quality of a November dawn that had decided to arrive despite everything. Albany was 2 hours north. The AUSA was waiting. The warrants were moving. Victor Montgomery was on the wrong side of a travel hold at Teterboro, watching the architecture of everything he had built begin to come down. And she was in the back of a car with a man she had known for 8 hours who had fallen through her door with a bullet in his side and changed the entire direction of her life by the simple and irrevocable act of saying her name like he already knew who she was. Ask me again, she said, after Albany. After the testimony, after I've slept for approximately 14 hours and had a real conversation with my brother and done the math on what my life actually looks like now. She turned to look at him. Ask me then. I will, he said. I know, she said. The car moved through the early morning. The drizzle came down steady and quiet. In the front seat, Torres drove without speaking, which was the particular courtesy of a man who understood that some conversations needed their space. Reed sat beside him, looking out his window at nothing and everything, the silence of a young man figuring out who he was going to be on the other side of a night that had asked him to decide. She thought about Gerald. She thought about him all the way up the first stretch of the highway, the sticky notes, the sliding eyes, the 19 years of loyalty that had finally turned towards something true at the end, the last phone call, the 3 specific words, don't open the door. She thought about the way that warning had landed in her chest and the way she had walked straight to the door and opened it anyway, and she thought that Gerald, wherever he was, would have understood that, would have recognized it as the same impulse that had kept him at that property for 19 years past the point of wisdom, the impulse that said this person needs something and I can provide it, and so I will. She was going to make sure his name was said correctly. In every room, in every proceeding, in whatever record was being built of this night, Gerald Briggs had earned that. He had earned more than that. She was going to make sure he got what she could give him. At 6:08, Ryan's phone, the restored phone, reassembled from the pieces she'd hidden under the cellar stone, buzzed once. He looked at it. His jaw tightened for one moment and then released. What? She said. Victor was taken into custody at Teterboro at 5:52. He looked up. His eyes were clear and certain, and carrying something that wasn't relief and wasn't triumph, but was quieter than either the specific weight of an ending that has cost too much to feel simple about. He's in federal custody, she breathed. It's over, she said. This part, he said. This part is over. She nodded, looked back out the window. Watched the gray morning open up ahead of them. On the highway, the rain thinning the sky, beginning to separate into the distinct layers of an actual day rather than the formless dark of the hours before it. At 6:15, she texted Daniel again. Save Saturday. I mean it. I have things to tell you. This time he didn't text back. This time he called. She answered on the first ring. His voice came through, warm and sleep-rough, and worried in the particular way he'd been worried about her since the accident, since she'd come home, since he'd understood what coming home had cost her, and had spent 3 years trying to find a way to say it that she would actually hear. Sarah, he said. What happened? Everything, she said, and nothing I can't handle. She pressed the phone closer to her ear. The warmth of his voice in it was the most real thing she'd felt since she'd pressed her back against the stone wall in the cellar and held still and held on. I'm okay, Daniel. I promise. I'll be home Saturday and I'll tell you all of it. Are you safe? She looked at the road ahead. She looked at the day arriving. She looked at the man beside her, this man she had carried through a storm, This man whose blood had dried on her uniform, and whose secrets she now carried, and whose life she had chosen in the space of 1 second on a night that had asked everything of her and gotten it. Yes, she said, I'm safe. And it was true. For the first time in longer than she could precisely name, longer than 6 months, longer than 3 years longer, maybe than the whole span of her adult life, it was simply, cleanly, entirely true. She had opened a door in the dark. She had chosen not to walk past someone who was falling. She had stood in the cold with nothing but what she knew and what she was, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough. Sarah Turner had walked into that night as a housekeeper who kept her head down and survived. She walked out of it as herself completely, finally without apology, and she was never going to be invisible again.